As a final example of what's going on in Air New Zealand, I'll talk about something we call the Green Team. So out of our 10,500 staff, we have now well over 3,000 that have signed up to be part of this environmental team. Di Patton, who heads up the team, who's an ex-executive director of Greenpeace, is our in-house environmental ambassador leading this initiative. This is all about getting staff a better understanding of their own personal and corporate environmental impact and taking action to minimise these impacts. A small measure of success of our Green Team is that we're now fielding countless calls from other companies that want information to set up and model similar initiatives. On an overall emissions basis, our initiatives are paying off. Along with the capacity reductions that we put in place over the last financial year, our efficiency program delivered a 10% fuel burn saving, lowering our emissions by over 350,000 tonnes of CO2 as compared with the previous financial year. Our emission intensity improvements since 1995 are approximately 10% overall, although much more significant on our short-haul fleet. And we expect a further 15% on our jet fleet over the next 10 years. And I would challenge other airlines and industries to come up with like or better intensity improvements. I'm proud of the action and I'm confident that Air New Zealand's brand image, brand awareness and passenger bookings are already benefiting from the leadership stance that we have taken. Condé Nast Traveller recently awarded us its Preservation Award for leading the way in exploring alternative fuel sources, and this type of profile translates into real value for Air New Zealand. In the aviation industry, though, we have no excuse for inaction. Emission reductions make sense irrespective of the science of climate change and irrespective of the cost of carbon. Whether you believe in the science or not, it's an indisputable fact that the aviation industry is a polluter and has an adverse impact on the environment. We could argue indefinitely on how we quantify that impact and how we take into account the corresponding benefits of aviation. The fact remains, we are polluters and we need to take responsibility for that. In some ways it should be irrelevant whether international aviation emissions are addressed under a UNFCCC umbrella or under an ICAO one. It is more important that we focus on the action and the outcomes. I've been incredibly disappointed at ICAO's paralysis on the issue. And while I deplore the EU's money-grabbing imposition of its ETS on air transport sectors both to and from Europe, I do applaud it for taking action. The risk of belabouring a point that's been well made today, my applause does not extend to the UK with its air passenger duty that purports to be environmental in nature, but has no incentive for carriers to reduce their environmental effect. It can only be described as a money grab. It makes no difference, for example, under the APD, if an airline carries 150 passengers on a full A320 or an A380 at a load factor less than 50%. Similarly, passengers pay the same whether they fly in a 20-year-old 747 or a 6-month-old 777-300 with its far greater fuel efficiencies. As an industry, we have to get our head around taking responsibility for minimising this impact on the environment and not rely on these artificial taxes to try and incent us to either the right or wrong behaviour. And let me share an example with you to really pick up on a point that Andrew made in the earlier session to say, well, how well aligned are we as an industry? On one of our key route groups, which is the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand, we've got one of our competitors that's been flying for the last 4 months at a little better than 50% load factors. So the equivalent of 7 A320s flying empty every day across the Tasman for the last 4 months. And if I read from their annual report of a couple of years ago, and I quote in the opening comments to the annual report, I was at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January and was aghast at the global warming hysteria sweeping the place, with airlines being demonised for their alleged 1.4% contribution to global emissions. If the green extremists and their cohorts in government and the media have their way, hundreds of thousands of jobs in the travel and tourism industry will be lost in the years ahead against a very dodgy, maybe unsupported by any conclusive evidence, and with a tide of evidence now sweeping in the opposite direction. Went on to say there is now a multi-billion-dollar industry invested in the myth that the future of our planet is at serious risk through the global warming caused by what people do. The green extremists are impervious to argument and tend, just to quote Al Gore's regrettably persuasive but fundamentally misleading and inconvenient truth at you. To my mind, when those in our industry are prepared to publicise statements like that, it's akin to painting a target on all our backs and loading the rifle and putting it in the hands of those that wish to attack our industry. And that, to me, is a far more extremist position than many of the people that line up against us. So in closing, I firmly believe that we all have a responsibility to minimise the emission intensity of aviation. This is a responsibility to act. First, to give effect to the improvements that are already available, then to support the innovation and investment in green technologies to further these improvements. As an industry, we can be seen as a leader, not because we have the biggest emissions reduction target or have the longest submissions to parliamentary committees, but because we operate in the most responsible manner, flying fit-for-mission equipment with high load factors, investing in continuous operational improvements, and putting our collective efforts towards developing and embracing leading-edge technologies that can make a real difference. Thank you.